In this video, I'll show you the top 10 things that beginners want to know how to do in Affinity Photo. Let's get started. The very first thing beginners want to know is how to open a photo. Luckily for us, this couldn't be easier. Just come up to the File menu, and then select Open. From here, you can choose any photo from your computer and open it in Affinity. And if you'd like to follow along with this tutorial, I left a download link in the video description for all of the photos that I'll be using, along with a PDF that summarizes everything we'll be learning. Okay, now let's move on to the second thing that beginners want to know, which is how Affinity Photo's interface is organized. The interface is broken into three main areas. You have your tools over on the left, the context toolbar at the top, and your studio panels on the right. Let's start by looking at the tools. Affinity Photo gives us a lot of different tools, including a tool for cropping, for painting, and for adding text. You don't need to learn about every tool right now, but the important thing is to notice what happens when you select different tools. If you look in the context toolbar, you'll notice that it changes every time I select a different tool. That's why it's called the context toolbar, because it will give you different options based on the context of what tool you currently have selected. Next, let's take a look at the studio panels over on the right side. There are around 30 different panels in Affinity Photo, and they offer a wide range of functionality. But you might be thinking, it doesn't look like there's 30 panels. And that's because you usually don't need all of the panels, so by default, Affinity hides the less important ones. In fact, most of the time, you only need two of the panels, the color panel and the layers panel. So to keep my interface tidy, I'll usually remove all the panels besides these two. To remove a panel, just click and drag on its name, and then press on the X to delete it. I'll continue this process to remove all of the unneeded panels. Our workspace looks a lot cleaner now, but you might be wondering how you could bring back those deleted panels. To do that, just come to the Window menu at the top, and then click on the name of the panel that you want to restore. Or if you just want all your panels to go back to the default, come down to Studio, Reset Studio. I also like to customize my panels, which you can do by opening the menu at the top right of the panel. With the color panel, I like to use the color wheel instead of the color sliders, but that's just my personal preference. And I also like to customize the layers panel. From here, I'll turn on large thumbnails to make it easier to see my layers. And I'll also turn off the layers checkerboard background because I think that looks a little distracting. Okay, now that our workspace is looking good, let's move on to the third thing beginners want to know, which is how to use adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are very important because they allow us to change the color and lighting of our images. You can find all of the adjustment layers by pressing on the two-colored circle at the bottom of the Layers panel. There are over 20 different adjustment layers, but to see an example of how they work, let's apply a white balance adjustment. After applying an adjustment layer, you'll be given sliders like these. Every adjustment layer has different sliders, but with this adjustment, we can change the white balance of our photo. For example, I could move this slider to the left to add more blue to the photo. Then when you're finished changing the white balance, you can close this dialog box. A fun thing about adjustment layers is that we can turn them on and off whenever we want, just by pressing on the little circle to the right of the layer. This allows you to experiment with how different changes will look on your photo. And of course, we can add more than one adjustment layer. This time, let's apply a brightness and contrast adjustment to our photo. Using this adjustment, we can easily change the brightness and the contrast of our image. But what if you want to change one of your adjustments after you've closed its dialog box? Well, all you need to do is press on its layer icon in the Layers panel, and the sliders will appear again. For this photo, I think I'll tone down the amount of blue I'm adding to it. To see how both of these adjustments are affecting the photo, we first need to select both of their layers. To do this, I'll hold down Shift and click on the other adjustments layer. Then we can turn them off and on at the same time. This is a good example of how adjustment layers work, but I'm going to delete both of these adjustments so that we can practice some other things. So I'll press the Delete key on my keyboard, which will delete both of the layers I had selected. Now it's time for the fourth thing that beginners want to know, which is how to brighten an image. We already saw that you can use a brightness and contrast adjustment, but there's actually a better adjustment that we can use, which is the curves adjustment layer. This adjustment might look a little strange at first, but it's really not too scary. The main thing to know is that this line controls all of the lighting in your image. If you bring the line up, it will make your photo brighter, and if you bring the line down, it will make your photo darker. But how is that better than the brightness and contrast adjustment? Well, the really neat part of curves is that we can independently affect the shadows and highlights in our image. If you move this part of the line, you'll affect the highlights in your image. And if you move this part of the line, you'll affect the shadows in your image. Most of the time, you'll want to brighten the highlights in your photo and darken the shadows. So with all of that being said, I'm going to bring up the highlights part of the line to brighten the photo's highlights, and then I'll lower the shadows part of the line to darken the shadows. In this particular photo, you can see that I brightened the highlights quite a bit, but only made the shadows a little darker. I know that curves is a little complicated the first time you use it, but being able to affect your shadows and highlights separately makes this adjustment the best way to improve your photo's lighting. Now let's learn the fifth thing that beginners want to know, which is how to enhance the color in an image. To do this, we'll apply an HSL adjustment layer. Using this adjustment, we can easily add more saturation to our photo's colors. But we can do even better than that. First, I'll reset this slider by double-clicking on it. Then I'll press on this red circle. From here, we can increase the saturation of just the red colors in the photo. But that's probably a little much, so I'll lower the saturation to something more reasonable. Then we can come to the yellows and increase their saturation as well. I'll continue this process for each of the color ranges. By targeting each color range separately, we can pick the perfect saturation for all of the colors in the photo. Okay, now we can see a before and after of our color improvements. And here's a before and after of both of the adjustment layers. Now for the sixth thing that beginners want to know, let's learn how to make targeted edits. So far, we've been using adjustment layers to affect the entire photo, but what if you want to edit a specific area? For example, let's say we want to darken the edges of the photo without darkening the model. To do this, we first need to add another curves adjustment layer to darken the photo. Let's keep things simple this time and bring the center of the line down. That will darken everything in the photo without us needing to work on the highlights and shadows separately. Now the entire photo is being darkened, but since we don't want to darken the model, we need to erase the curves adjustment from the model. But to do this, we aren't going to use an eraser. Instead, we're going to use the paintbrush tool. We can use the paintbrush to determine where an adjustment layer will be applied. We paint white whenever we want an adjustment to be visible, and we paint black wherever we want it to be invisible. I like to remember this by thinking of how things look in the middle of the night. During the night, everything becomes pitch black, making things around you invisible. In the same way, black paint makes adjustment layers invisible. So because we want the curves adjustment to become invisible wherever the model is, we need to change our paint color to black. You can do this by clicking on the black circle in the color panel. Now, wherever we paint, the curves adjustment will be hidden from those areas. Remember, black paint makes things invisible, just like how things are invisible when it's pitch black at night. Now the curves adjustment is only visible on the edges of the photo because I painted black over the model. But it doesn't look very good. It looks way too obvious where I painted. That's because my brush hardness is set to 100%. This makes my paint strokes very harsh and noticeable. But I want my painting to be soft and subtle, so I need to lower my hardness. An easy way to do that is to click and drag on the word hardness. Now let's try painting again, but with 0% hardness this time. But first, I'll undo my old paint strokes by pressing Command-Z on a Mac or Control-Z on a PC. Now let's try painting again. And as I'm painting, I want to mention that you can make your paintbrush bigger or smaller from the context toolbar. Just click and drag on the word width, or enter an exact number into the widths box. Okay, now let's see a before and after of the curves adjustment. It looks much better than before, but I think I painted a little too much. It looks like I removed too much of the curves adjustment from down here. Luckily for us, this is an easy fix. Remember that painting in black makes things invisible, but painting in white makes them visible again. So I'll change my paint color to white, and then paint over that area to bring back the curves adjustment. You can continue painting in white and black to adjust the areas that are being darkened, but I think that looks great. And now we're on to the 7th thing that beginners want to know, which is how to clean up their images. As an example, let's remove this plant that's floating in the water. To do this, we'll use the inpainting brush. To get out this tool, we first need to click on this little triangle. That triangle means that there's other tools hiding underneath the tool that we can see. Now we can select the inpainting brush. This is one of my favorite tools in Affinity Photo. It lets you paint over anything in a photo, and then Affinity will erase the thing that you painted over. But before we use this tool, there's a little bit of setup that we need to do. First, we need to click on this button, which will make a new pixel layer. A pixel layer is just a blank layer that we can paint on. Next, we need to click and drag to place the pixel layer directly above the photos layer. And finally, we need to come up to the context toolbar and change current layer to current layer and below. There's some technical reasons for why we need to do all of this setup, but you don't need to worry about that as a beginner. Just follow these steps and then you're ready to go. Now we just need to paint over the plant in the water. And poof, it's gone. I don't know about you, but I think the inpainting brush is so magical. It's definitely one of my favorite tools in Affinity Photo. And now, if I hold down Shift, I can select all of these layers so that we can see a before and after of our edits. You've already come so far, but there's a few last things that I want to show you. Which brings us to the 8th thing that beginners want to know, how to remove the background of a photo. But to see how this works, I'm first going to open a new photo. This new photo is included in the download link in the video description, along with the PDF summary of this tutorial. Then we can close out of the original photo we were working on, since we're done with it for now. Okay, now let's remove the background of this photo. And to do that, we need to make a selection of everything that we don't want removed. So in this example, we need to make a selection of the woman. And to make a selection, we can use the selection brush. With this tool, we just need to click and drag over anything that we want to select. But first, I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, since we want to select a large part of the picture, and a bigger brush will help that to go faster. Now we just need to paint over the model, and Affinity will do its best to select her. And if you ever select too much, just hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard, and then anything you paint over will be removed from your selection. After finishing your selection, press the Refine button in the context toolbar. This will soften the edges of your selection, which will make it look a little nicer. And you don't need to worry about any of these sliders, so go ahead and press Apply. Now we're ready to apply a mask. A mask will hide everything in the photo except for the area that we have selected. To add a mask, click on the button at the bottom of the Layers panel that looks like a Japanese flag. And just like that, we've removed the background. Now we can get rid of our selection by pressing Command-D on a Mac or Control-D on a PC. But now that the selection lines are gone, we can see that Affinity didn't do a perfect job selecting the woman. Lucky for us, we can paint in white and black on a mask, just like how we did with the curves adjustment layer. But first I'll zoom into the photo so that I can paint more carefully. You can press Command plus or Command minus to zoom in and out on a Mac, or Control plus and minus on a PC. Then if you hold down the spacebar key, you can click and drag to move around. Okay, now let's get out the paintbrush tool. And since we'll be painting in such a small area, I'll make my brush size smaller. Also, make sure you're painting in black, because we want the area of the background to become invisible, just like the pitch black of night. And with all that done, we're ready to begin painting. I'm going to start by carefully painting around the edges of this area. After painting the edges, I'll make my brush bigger to quickly paint the rest of the area. A quick way to do this is to use the bracket keys on your keyboard, which will make your brush bigger or smaller. This shortcut works on all of the brush tools in Affinity, so I use it all the time. Now with a bigger brush, it will be really fast to paint the rest of this area. Okay, now let's see if any other areas need to be cleaned up. It looks like we need to work on her hair. To do that, I'm first going to switch my paint color to white, and then paint to bring back all of her hair. Now that we can see all of her hair again, let's paint in black to remove the background. And to do that, we can use the keyboard shortcut X, which will switch our paint color between white and black. So now with black paint, we can paint away the background. Now I'll continue moving around the photo, and I'll clean up any other messy areas. As I do so, I want to remind you of the shortcuts that we've learned. You can use the spacebar key to move around your photo, the bracket keys to make your paintbrush bigger or smaller, and the X key to switch your paint color between white and black. Using these shortcuts, it won't take long to clean up your mask. After a couple of minutes, I've finished painting. Now to zoom back out, we can press Command or Control 0, which will perfectly fit the photo to our screen. I know that took a little bit of work, but now we've successfully removed the background from this photo. Great job! Now we can move on to the 9th thing that beginners want to know, which is how to add a new background. To do this, we'll come up to the File menu, and then down to Place. From here, select the photo that you want to add. Then we just need to click and drag to place the photo. But this new photo needs to be underneath the woman, so I'm going to click and drag to move its layer underneath hers. Now let's press Command or Control- to zoom out a little. Then we can finish resizing the photo. Then I'll press Command or Control-0 to fit the photo to my screen. And just like that, we've added a new background to this photo. And now it's finally time for the 10th thing that beginners want to know: how to save and export your work. To do this, come up to the File menu, and then down to Save As. This will save as an Affinity file, which you can open later on if you want to continue working on your photo. But if you're finished editing, then come down to Export. From here, you can export your work as a regular photo that people without Affinity can open. From the top of the dialog box, you can choose the file type that you want to use. There are a lot of options, but most of the time you'll use JPEG. And if you want, you can lower the size of your exported photo if you need the file to be smaller. You can see an estimate of the file size from down here. Then, when everything is ready to go, you can press Export. From here, you can save the photo onto your computer, and then you're ready to share your wonderful creation with the world. Great job! I know that was a lot to learn, so be sure to download the PDF summary in the video description. You've already learned so much, and I'll see you in the next Affinity Revolution tutorial.